What we're doing today is dealing with an ongoing injustice in our criminal legal system. For the last 123 years, evidence of prior bad acts, in all cases, but particularly in sexual offenses, were not admissible in most cases, with some exceptions. For 300 years, including 3/4 of the last century, the sexual history of female victims in these cases was let in. And it was often the main defense for someone charged to put the woman's character on trial. No restrictions to talking about how often she would engage in sexual activity, not crimes, by the way, just consensual sexual activity. Okay, you say, thank God we now have rape shield laws, so we don't do that anymore. Or do we? In 2024, as we sit here today, New York state law, which we should fix, by the way, allows evidence to be admitted against a complainant of a sexual offense if they were convicted of a crime of prostitution in the last 3 years. Now I ask you, what the hell does that have to do with whether somebody was raped or assaulted 2 or 3 years later? I don't see any of you sponsoring that bill if you're so concerned about not letting in previous acts that are unrelated to the current situation. You also can let in prior history with the defendant. So if someone had an ongoing consensual relationship with someone, but then at some point it turned to non-consensual, you can admit all of that prior history to make the case that the victim is not credible. And so we have a system right now that victimizes the victims again. And so I do think it's fair to say, let us balance the scales of justice as it relates to these offenses only, because these are very unique. These cases often involve, more so than in any other crime, involve one person's word against another. This is activity that takes place behind closed doors. And a jury is often left with shrugging its shoulders, not knowing who to believe. Oftentimes doesn't even get that far because prosecutors don't bring the cases. This is in fact the most undercharged set of crimes that we have in our system. And so I do think the same way the federal government and 16 other states have been doing for about 3 decades in this country, we can say for this specific set of crimes, it is illustrative to the jury who to believe in a situation like that where you don't have much more evidence about consent. It's been the case federally for 30 years. I don't know what courses Senator Palumbo is taking to keep up with his CLE credits, but maybe he wants to take some on this issue, because that rule has been challenged constitutionally multiple times in multiple circuits throughout the country, always upheld as constitutional. And in fact, those decisions use the very word propensity to describe what the federal rule allows. The key in those cases is that there is language that allows a judge to weigh the probative value versus the prejudicial effect, and to reject the evidence if the prejudice outweighs the probative value. That is exactly the language we have in this bill. The last thing I would say, because my political colleagues across the aisle decided to try and turn this into a discussion that we had months ago about our Court of Appeals. To be clear, the Court of Appeals interpreted the law as it exists. You may not like the law as it exists. I apparently don't, because I'm putting this bill forward to change the law. We never had a statute on this question in New York. This has all been based on case law that flowed from a 123-year-old case. And so what we're doing now is giving some clarity statutorily as to what we want to allow and what we don't want to allow in these cases in New York. So let's not sit there and try and bring up old grudges. on this, because in fact, the bill and the hostile amendment that was proposed by the other side is exactly the standard that exists now. All Senator Palumbo did was take the Molyneux standard that this case law has been talking about for 123 years and put it on a piece of paper and put it forward as a bill. It would change absolutely nothing. And so if a court finds that the current state of common law required this outcome, they would exactly find the same outcome if this bill were to be enacted. So let's for once try and focus on the right priorities. For me, that is making sure that victims of sexual assault and sexual offenses in our state are treated respectfully, get to tell their stories, and we balance the scales of justice as it relates to these cases in New York. Thank you, Madam President. I vote yes.
Senator Gianaris.